People in our own backyards are hurting. There are insecurities around food, economics, mental health, access to justice, healthcare, and our society continues to become more divisive. But there is hope. Right here in Chicagoland, there are people and organizations who are on the front lines, working to bring about positive and transformative change. Each week, we're going to meet some of these agents of change and examine how they are spurring innovative ideas and finding solutions to push our society forward in a more just direction. I'm Sufyan Sohel, and this is Change Agents. On January 27, 2017, a few days after taking office, President Donald Trump signed Executive Order 13769 into effect. This executive order, more commonly known as the Muslim ban, limited travel to the United States to travelers from many predominantly Muslim countries. This executive order followed comments expressed during the 2016 presidential campaign that included a statement by then presidential candidate Donald Trump, who called for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. The Muslim ban and the rhetoric that preceded it emboldened white supremacists and others while legitimizing hatred and fear of Muslims right here in America. This hate is not new. Since 9/11, law enforcement statistics show an increase of hate crimes reported towards the Muslim American community. The Southern Poverty Law Center has collected immense amounts of data on mosques vandalized or destroyed, death threats and harassment reported, victims beaten, attacked, or held at gunpoint for merely being perceived as Muslims. To talk about this hate faced by the Muslim American community and the work being done to address it, we are joined tonight by two brilliant guests and activists. My first this evening is legislative drafter, author, and the current director of advocacy and policy for the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, Ms. Maria Muzaffar. Maria, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Maria, can you start off by telling us what's so unique about this hate being faced by the Muslim American community?
Well, I wish I could say that it was unique. This is a playbook, I think, throughout history of our country, right? Whenever there is a population or a community that seems to be not mainstream, which is also a misconception we can go into, then the response is either to isolate the community or to respond to that community in a way that makes them feel unwelcome.
Sure.
And specifically, if it's tied to a crime committed by a few that have nothing to do with the larger community and are perpetrated by criminals, then the response is politically to create a enemy within kind of scenario, which we saw with Japanese Americans, right? And we saw throughout history, even with the early population of the Jewish community in this country. So it's not unique, it's just currently happening right now.
But I feel like it's been going on, now the last 21 years?
Right.
And anytime, something bad happens where there may be a Muslim actor involved, either locally or internationally, the whole community seems to be demonized by the press, by elected officials. Why this one community? Why don't we see that same with bad actors of other communities?
Sure. Well, first of all, let's be clear that after 9/11, there was a legislative change,
Sure.
right? When we had the passage of the U.S. Patriot Act, and there was actually a change of probable cause to reasonable suspicion. And so what that did is that it created the mindset that individuals that were suspicious were the ones that we could target, that we could go into, and that's all we needed for a warrant. So that dropped the threshold. So when you have that legislative change, and then it works in real time, people that are suspicious are under surveillance without probable cause, then that's how the public responds, that's how the media responds. So there's always an example of what's happening in real life, and then the media picks up on it in the sense that that is a narrative that could be seen as something that is mainstream or could be created as mainstream because that's what is being observed. Specifically when people are arrested or people are suspects, that's where people follow what the processes are.
Thank you for highlighting that. I'm going to come back to something you said in a minute, but first, tell me a little bit about who Muslims are in America. You're the policy director with the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. Yeah, I believe you just released a big report.
Yes, no, I have the honor and privilege for the last 2 years to serve as Director of Advocacy and Policy for which is now the Muslim Civic Coalition, right? And a groundbreaking organization, incredible. And they just released a report, which is the Illinois Muslims Report, which studied, really based on a survey, who Muslims were in Illinois. And the three critical things that I think, there are many things that stand out, but for this process, for this conversation right now, we understand that Muslims in Illinois are extremely charitable, right? Extremely charitable. A quarter of the Muslims pay at least $1,000 to $5,000 in donation,
wow.
right? We have about 32% of the respondents who are actively involved and engaged with their legislators, volunteering for campaigns, very civically engaged, right? And over 40% of the population has higher education degrees. So we're talking about a generous, civically engaged, educated community in the state of Illinois. That's who the Muslims are as a snapshot, right? So engaging with that community in really substantive issues is productive, results in actual change, and you have people actually making an impact every day.
I love that. I got to step up my own donation game to catch that average. But thank you for sharing that information. You mentioned Japanese internment.
Yeah.
And that was law of this country for so long and only overturned, from my research, when the Muslim ban was upheld by the Supreme Court. Do you foresee, you've been working on legislative advocacy and writing bills for a long time and on a plethora of issues. Tell me a little bit about that, and your thoughts of, do you ever see, I know there's no ban acts and others in Congress, do you ever see that being overturned by Congress?
So let me start out by saying that unfortunately, it was a long time that we had Korematsu turned over, right? So we want to see history here, and we want to see that people take a long time because of lack of will, so to speak, or they think it's not necessary. I think that right now where we're headed is that the country has woken up, that something like the Muslim ban was completely unconstitutional. But I also believe that no community and we as a country cannot be complacent, and that there's always, when the tide changes, when political feelings change, sentiments change, and when communities are used for political gain, which means to galvanize the troops, right? Touch on people's weaknesses. Then we have legislators using legislative vehicles to attack communities and really use words like bans, right?
Sure.
And so, which brings me kind of like to your second question of I've been doing this legislative work for so long and why I do it, right? But the most important observation is, for someone who's working in this space, is that words on code, binding code, do matter. So we can do protests, we can march, we can educate, and we're all for that, right? As advocates, we're all for that. But we have to make sure that we look at the fine print in legislation, and if we don't find what we see, that we create what we want to see. We don't have to wait for anyone or an exception to the rule. We have to create the rules as well, and communities and community members can have a vital role in that process.
Thank you. You have a global talk show. You are writing amazing legislative pieces. You're an author. What's your inspiration to do this work? What keeps you waking up each day wanting to go out there and be a voice for all of these communities you're representing?
So I appreciate that question because it gives me an opportunity to speak directly to what we're discussing, which is the Muslim community, which is a community of faith. Sure. So my faith drives me to do this work.
I love hearing that.
Because to be honest with you, the more you study your faith and the more I studied Islam, the closer I got to my faith, the closer relationship you create with the Creator. And you understand that the Creator created all of us for a purpose. And anyone who's lost a loved one or who's lost friends, we know that nothing is guaranteed. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. And so I want to make sure that I am doing everything that I'm designed to do. Right? I'm designed to do. And that's really my inspiration. It could be through a book. It could be through legislative work. It could be through this conversation, which may touch on something significant for somebody. I don't take any word or any moment for granted.
I love that. The show is all about inspiring change and people going out and doing good, and I love seeing those who come on are inspired by their faith to do good. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We are grateful for change agents like Maria who are drafting legislation to protect many of our most vulnerable. Please sit tight. We'll be right back with our next guest after this short break.
Hi, I'm Darius Hillman. I am so excited to welcome to this week's program New York Times best-selling author, poet, and mental health advocate, my new BFF, Bassie Igby. Coming up this Friday, thoughtful, compelling conversations with a decidedly Chicago flavor in the arena, Friday at 7 p.m. on CAN TV 19 and streaming on cantv.org.
Welcome back. My next guest tonight is Ahmad Rehab, Executive Director of the Chicago office of the Council on American Islamic Relations, more commonly known as CARE Chicago. Ahmad, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's my pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Ahmad, Muslims continue to be demonized by media, by elected officials. At the same time, reported hate crimes towards Muslim communities increasing and at high levels. Why is there a disconnect in that, and what's the issue that we're missing here?
I would argue that there is a connect in that
Sure.
actually one causes the other, or at least contributes to the other.
Okay.
So when you see the demonization in media, in some components of the media, I think we've gotten better over time. There's still much more space to grow into as far as the media is concerned, but there's been improvements. But nonetheless, when you see demonization in the media or in politics, which remains quite ripe, unfortunately, that contributes to the hate crimes and to the violations of civil liberties and the general Islamophobia out there against Muslim communities.
What would you say is that cause of that Islamophobia? Where's it coming from?
It's a big question, and I think there are multiple angles one can look at. It's not one thing. In some quarters of this country, it comes from what you can call ignorance or lack of information.
Sure.
And that vacuum is basically filled with stereotypes and tidbits of news that comes in through whatever cable station they're watching or something, a blog that they follow. And so something that is as elaborate and beautiful and diverse and pluralistic and complex as the Muslim community in the United States and really in the world becomes reduced to something that is a caricature of itself, usually to the worst apple in the basket. So if it's a terrorist attack, if it is a women's rights issue in Iran that happens to a particular citizen and makes big news, suddenly those things which are true, that they actually happen, the problem isn't that they happen or we deny them happening, it's that the lack of logic in looking at these things and extending them to everyone who's Muslim and shaping your entire worldview of Islam and Muslims through these very narrow entry points. And you could do this with any community, and you could do this with Americans. You could look at episodes of mass killing, which are unfortunately unique to this country. You could look at, our gun problems. You could look at other issues that we have, the overspending and the borrowing and the debt that we have, et cetera, and make very wide stereotypes and generalizations about all Americans, and you would arrive at the same problem. So that is one area. Another, I would say, is agenda-driven, and it depends on which communities we're looking at. But in some religious communities, like in the right-wing evangelical communities, they see Islam as a competitor. It is the one religion other than theirs, in their view, that still proselytizes and still wins over members of other religions into it. And so there's that sense of competition, so it's in their interest to demonize and scaremonger against that religion in that competitive fashion of trying to win more adherents. And then you have political ideologies like the far-right, Zionist movements that again see Muslims en masse as pro-Palestinian, which there's truth to that. And so that community is then seen as an enemy or as a barrier to the type of propaganda they want to put out into the world.
Thank you for that. I mean, we live in Chicago, very progressive city, self-proclaimed welcoming city. But according to statistics on your website that I read, you have over 300 reported cases annually of anti-Muslim or those perceived to be Muslim discrimination. For a welcoming city, isn't that somewhat problematic?
It is, but I think we need to look at things in context. If
Sure.
you want to talk about Islamophobia from the perspective of Islamophobia and human rights, civil rights, etc., it is a problem. From the perspective of Chicago, it's kind of like talking about, if you're a doctor and you talk about your patients. As a doctor, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see people who have issues. You're not going to see healthy people. So from the perspective of a doctor, they're going to see patients. But from the perspective of the larger domain of the public, you can't really look at these patients and make a statement about the larger domain. Okay. So as civil rights activists, we're seeing the problem of Islamophobia play out. But if you look at how many Chicagoans are not Islamophobic, how many communities are welcoming, how many parts of the city have no problems, that's a different view, okay? So I think it's a problem to make a statement about Chicago when we look at these instances. But we can talk about Islamophobia and the fact that it still exists as a problem because, as a doctor, you don't want to see anybody, eating the wrong way or not exercising or smoking or drinking in a way that hurts their body. So you can speak against these things and say that these are bad things for you. Islamophobia is bad. Anti-Semitism is bad. Homophobia is bad. Hate and bigotry is bad, and they exist. They may not exist everywhere. Chicago at large is much better than many places in this country, sure. But it exists. And so far as it exists, we're the ones whose job it is to look at that. And so we see a lot of it, and we say we need to stop it. We need to end it.
Thank you for teeing me up for my next question. How are you looking at it? How are you dealing with it? What sort of cases are you seeing, and what sort of efforts is your organization doing to push back?
We're seeing employment discrimination, housing discrimination. We're seeing a lot of travel problems, whether it is from TSA or CPB, Customs and Border Patrol, sure. Or even DHS. We're seeing a lot of, and with the travel stuff, we're seeing a lot of Muslims who, for no apparent reason, are being stopped, put into secondary screening, or asked a whole load of questions before they travel or after they arrive for hours on end. Not one time, but every time they travel, and they answer the same questions every time, and they're asked these questions again. And it's unclear why they're being targeted. They haven't done anything. Sometimes they may have done something that raises a red flag, but then they answer the question and they clarify it, and they're still asked. For example, someone might have, sent funds to a country in Africa or Asia, and they answer the question. The reason why I'm sending money abroad to this country is because I have a receipt here. I funded a well. A freshwater well in this poor village. End of story. So you would think. They keep asking them again, who do you know? Who are your friends? Do you know this guy? Do you know this person? Where did you travel? Why are you there? Why are you here? And it goes on and on and on multiple times. So this kind of harassment is hard to stop because it's kind of a black hole. There's no transparency. There are no laws or rights for travelers. The FBI issues people knocking on doors from the FBI and asking random people questions that have nothing to do with their lives. We see discrimination from the political world sometimes, and also instances of Islamophobia in the media, what you can call bigoted statements or generalized statements in some shows and some TV shows or talk shows.
Thank you. Now, for the travel-related issues, travel ban's over. You guys are still helping people with travel-related issues?
Indeed, because the culture that was created, I think, lingers. That's one component of it. So while the law du jour, is gone, de facto, it's still kind of there in some corners with some agents. They still look at somebody who's in a Muslim garb or someone dark-skinned with a beard or something, and their guard goes up a little higher and stronger than it would with maybe a white person. So there's that. And then there's also what I talked about earlier, all these lists that nobody knows anything about, whose people's names are on there. Oftentimes it's a confusion of two people because they have similar names, but many times there are common names. It's like a John Smith, like a Muhammad Ahmed, sure. In that case. There are a million people called that. And so if you're just going by a name rather than something more uniquely identifying of that individual, like a thumbprint or something like that, or a facial metric, of course you're going to catch a lot of people that you're not really looking for, and they all go through the grinder, so to speak. So there's that.
Oh, thanks for sharing more about that. And from what I read, you're helping people outside of Muslim countries also with that.
Yes. So anyone who comes to CARE Chicago and is targeted because of potential Islamophobia, they are clients that we can take. So it doesn't matter if you're Hindu, it doesn't matter if you're a Sikh person, it doesn't matter if you're a Coptic person. They tend to be, darker-skinned individuals who are mistaken for Muslims and targeted as such. And the fact that they're not Muslims does not mean we turn them away. We say, well, you were targeted as a Muslim, we're going to defend you as one.
Interesting. So do you get a lot of people outside the Muslim faith who are calling you?
We get a good number, I think.
Okay.
And, generally speaking, you can't, as Malcolm X, I believe, said, civil rights cannot be divided. There's no civil rights for Muslims and civil rights for Jews and civil rights for Christians or, et cetera. There's just one set of civil rights, one set of human rights. We work because we have limited capacity to serve the Muslim community as a priority. There are other organizations, MALDEF with the Mexican community, GLAD with the, LGBTQ community. There's the ADL for the Jewish community, et cetera. So CARE, specializes in helping members of the Muslim community along the lines of equality and opportunity, et cetera. However, we believe in the larger picture being one picture. And so we will ally and have coalitions with other organizations, other communities working for their particular space within that larger tapestry so we can all move forward together.
Which is really important. We can't push one community ahead at the behest of others.
Right.
Well said. You recently launched an anti-bullying campaign. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So after COVID ended, well, it didn't end, but after the COVID remote schooling and work, and after people went back to the normal way of life and back to school, we saw an uptick of bullying against Muslim students in many districts in the Chicagoland area. And this was pretty alarming. Some of it might have been because people have been out of school for so long and now they're back and they have all this energy that was, I don't know. But it's unfortunate. And so we wanted to deal with it in a systematic fashion because it was happening far too often. So we created a project, and something CARE Chicago does. We respond to problems in systemic ways. With the travel problem, everybody came to the airports in the early days and did a great job, but then kind of went back to their normal lives, a few weeks later. We wanted to stick around, so we systemized the Travelers Assistance Project that's still alive today to help people because we knew this problem would not leave with the lawyers that left, 2 or 3 weeks into the initial Muslim ban. So likewise with the bullying problem, it's going to stick around and it's happening everywhere in a lot of places. So we wanted a systemic way to deal with it. So we created healsters.org. And that is an anti-bullying project that has advocacy components, education components, immediate response components, training for students, for bystanders, for potential victims, for parents and teachers. And so it's sort of a holistic approach to the problem of bullying, again, with Muslims in mind, because that is our immediate community that we serve, but very, very purposefully and very clearly stating that it can only succeed if we're part of the larger movement against bullying. And so we're plugged into many of those movements.
Thank you. One last real quick question as we run out of time. You have 3 young sons.
Yeah.
What words do you have for them right now as they are growing up and you want to inspire them to go out and follow your footsteps maybe, or what sort of life do you want them to live in terms of activism and advocacy and social justice?
I want them to be, first of all, good human beings. That's even before they're good Muslims, because you're born and you later learn that you're this or that or the other, but you're human the moment you start crying, the moment someone pokes you and you have a stimulus response, the moment you're hungry and you ask for food. So this human nature comes first. So be a good human and build on that being a good Muslim, or a good Jew, or a good Christian, or a good Hindu, whatever it is that you are. So for us, it's a good Muslim. And then from there, this country is your country. You belong here. You're not a second-rate citizen. You're not a guest citizen. Just because you're Muslim, or just because you have a father who's originally from Egypt, or you're as equal as anybody else from anywhere else. So own it. And then the sky's the limit. Pursue your dreams. Be confident. Be proud of who you are. Give back. Contribute. Stand up for those who have lesser opportunities, who have greater challenges, and as if they were yourself. So this sense of camaraderie with others as well.
I love it. And I wish them all the best and wish you the best. And I thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Of course. We thank Ahmed and all our guests today for sharing their wisdom with us and reminding us how important it is for all of us to work together towards collective and impactful change. We'll be right back with this week's Change in Action. In this week's Change in Action, I am pleased to introduce you to Abdullah Mitchell. the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CIOGC.
Hello, my name is Gregory Abdullah Mitchell. I'm the Executive Director of the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. And I'm here to tell you about myself and the organization I represent. That organization is the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. It's a federation of Muslim organizations based here in northeastern Illinois, being mosques, schools, and some social service agencies. And me standing alone, I'm not comfortable calling myself a change agent, but through the collaboration of these 63 different organizations, we are agents for change. The primary way I would say we accomplish that is through our charitable giving. Zakat Chicago, that is our charitable arm. That is how we reach out to those in need throughout Chicago. Last year and earlier this year, when refugees were coming from Afghanistan, through our committee, reached out and assisted unaccompanied minors, made sure they were able to participate in worship services, made sure they had something to eat, helped them through our holy month of Ramadan, helped them find housing, clothing. Standing once again, this is the collaborative effort of these organizations. But it didn't just stop there. We also are concerned about those in hunger. We support 11 different food pantries through Greater Chicago area, and we had the opportunity to partner with Advocate Aurora Health. And through them, we were able to provide over 500 every month, 500 food baskets to fresh, nutritious food baskets to people in need. Another area where we try to have an impact is in healthcare. Two initiatives we have is one, there are two free clinics located on the south side of Chicago. One is at a mosque called Masjid al-Faruq. We support that. We have doctors who volunteer and provide free medical services to people in the neighborhood, not just the people of that particular mosque. The other initiative that I want to refer to is that we also fund mental health training it's called first responders. This is how people, religious leaders or community leaders, will be sensitized to recognize when someone they know, a member of their congregation, is under stress, and how to help them get the needed care that they need. In addition, we don't limit our work to what we do. We do partner with other outside organizations. We have joined the Mayor Lightfoot's Interfaith Committee that examines police reform. We've shared with the Chicago Police Department policies that officers should be aware of when they interact with the Muslim community. These and other initiatives are what makes us an agent for change.
Thank you to Abdullah, the entire CIOGC team, and to all of our guests tonight for their incredible work in advocating for the Muslim community. Unfortunately, hate continues to persist, and our world is becoming more divisive. So many people, based on their race, religion, class, and on so many other identifying factors, face discrimination and isolation on a regular basis. Each of us has the power to overcome our own personal biases, to learn from one another, and to offer kindness and respect to those around us. Hate has no home here in Chicago or anywhere. As we have learned these past few weeks, sometimes even the smallest action can have a positive impact on the lives of those around us. We all have the ability to stand up against hate and injustice, to speak up for the rights of those around us, to spread kindness, and to do a little good. We can all be change agents. Let us all be change agents. I look forward to seeing you all next week.